Good morning, everyone. How are we on this chilly, almost spring morning? Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Floretta Boonzaier. I always forget to introduce myself, so I thought, let me just remember this one thing to introduce myself. So I'm Floretta Boonzaier. I teach at the University of Cape Town in psychology. I am a mom to twin boys who are 18 years old. And when I told them that I was facilitating a session on raising feminist boys, they didn't bat an eyelid. So I think that's a good sign. They didn't say I'm not feminist. So, yeah. Lovely to have you all with us. And most importantly, our speakers this morning, our panelists who have all the answers to how to, how to raise feminist boys. Raising feminist boys, I saw one poster for the session said, raising boys for the future. I think it's raising boys, men for now, not the future necessarily. But let me start off by introducing our guests, our panelists this morning. We are privileged to have Philippa Namutebi Kabali-Kagwa, who's a Ugandan South African poet, storyteller, coach, and facilitator. Philippa is the youngest daughter of Ugandan poet and civil servant, the late Heinrich Böll. Excuse me. While she's most commonly called Philippa, she always signs Namutebi at the end of her poems. Philippa says, Namutebi is the creative side of me. She's the one who writes. She has a passion for folk tales and myths, the wisdom of centuries and the tried and tested imagery, the archetypal characters that give new perspective to the perennial questions that we struggle with. Philippa has published poems in a number of collections and written 4 children's books. Her recent book is a memoir entitled Flame and Song, a memoir published in 2016, a book that touches on the life enriched by song, literature, food, and spirituality across Uganda, Addis Ababa, and Cape Town. It's a captivating narrative about places and the people who occupy those places. Welcome, Philippa.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody.
Up next, we have Pumla Dineo Gqola, who holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Postcolonial Studies from Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich. Pumla is a full professor in literature with a specific focus on African feminism, African literature, race, class, and gender, and the histories of slavery. She's also the South African NRF Chair in African Feminist Imagination. She's authored several books. Many of these have been central to my own work on gender-based violence and femicide. Her books include winner of the 2016 Sunday Times Award, Rape, A South African Nightmare, and her most recent book, The Female Fear Factory, was published in 2021. It's a powerful meditation on how fear works to keep women subjugated and to reinforce patriarchal control. Welcome, Pumla.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Floretta.
And last but most certainly not least, comrade, colleague, and friend, Barbara Boswell, who's a creative writer and associate professor at the University of Cape Town. Barbara teaches and researches in African women's writing, Black diasporic feminist writing, queer theory, and post-colonial studies. Barbara is author of Grace, a novel from 2017, winner of the University of Johannesburg's debut Creative Writing Prize, and she also authored the monograph, And I Wrote My Story Anyway, Black South African Women's Novels as Feminism. She's a member of the board of Agenda, Feminist Journal, and a board member of Imbiza Journal, and her latest novel, which is a must-read, was published in 2024, The Comrade's Wife, is a novel that touches on themes of love, politics, power, wealth, and so much more. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you.
So, raising feminist boys. Where do we start? I suppose the question is to start about why this is an issue for conversation, you know? Like, why do we need to talk about raising feminist boys? When I asked my boys, one of them said, it's something you don't talk about. You shouldn't be really talking about unless it's a problem. Which I thought was an interesting, you know, unless it becomes a problem, then you talk about gender equality or inequality. Otherwise, it's just like, you do you, and do what you need to do. So, yeah. Who wants to reflect on why we should be having this conversation today? Barbara looks like she's got something to say.
Nobody. I think it's an important issue to be reflecting on. I also wondered at boys, because I think we should be raising feminist children. And we also, the idea of boy immediately invokes for me also gender non-binary people who are not boys, who are not girls either, who are also feminist. And so that was my critical mind thinking, oh, boys, you know. And we get this discourse quite often when we, in feminist work. I worked years ago on the Young Women's Leadership Project at UCT, and there's always a critique of, but we need to bring boys along too, because we can empower women and we can empower girls, but the other side of the equation, if we're thinking within this binary logic, is boys, and what are we doing with boys and for boys? And then there's also the discourse around the girl child, which is the UN language of empowering the girl child and protect the girl child. And I think the whole idea of boys being part of that conversation is a critique of that, or the idea of boys being left behind. And I think these are all valid concerns. And I think when I think about raising children, thank God my days are over of that. I have a 27-year-old man who is my son. He's no longer a boy. And I think it's important as feminists that we think about all children and all young people and how to reach them with feminist values.
Yeah.
So I think that, two things. The first one is that I come to feminist conversation initially as a much younger person and to feminist community at a time where one of the really important recurring contestations was whether people who were not women could be feminist, right? So for me, it's not such a straightforward question to. I'm really excited by the fact that we're at a point where we take for granted more and more that people of all genders can be feminist. But I carry both of those questions, so it's never for me. It's never a given that being able to call yourself feminist is kind of automatic. Able to attach with any kind of gender progressive position. It's not, I don't take that for granted. I kind of fluctuate, and this question haunts me. And I change my mind. And I think also, especially at this time, and it haunts me especially at this time where it seems like the word feminist is hyper-visible and often attaches itself to things that seem, to my eye, quite conventionally patriarchal. So sometimes I'm like, okay, but what? Sure, I'm not saying whether a person can be feminist or not, but in terms of behavior, sometimes things are done in the name of feminism, and I think, I have questions. Not about the person doing the things, but about
I'm not sure why this kind of thing that we're doing here is feminist specifically versus other things. And also where things that kind of quite conventionally have been considered like patriarchy 101 are sometimes also being called feminist, right? So I suppose the relationship between feminist and boys for me is kind of, at least raising feminist boys for me as someone who is raising a boy directly and is raising other boys in the way that raising doesn't often mean. It's a complicated kind of, I think it's an important, but it's so that relationship is not a straightforward one. Am I a feminist mother of a boy? Yes, absolutely, unapologetically. Do I raise my child and the children that I have some responsibility to? And I don't mean lots of other people's children. I mean people literally in my life, like my nephews and nieces and my friends' kids. Because I'm also very, we live in a context where women are constantly forced and bullied into being symbolic mothers. So when I'm in Southern Africa, I'm very clear, I'm not everybody's mother. I don't even want to be called mama. It's not respect. And I don't care, I don't care how many times I get scolded for not being sufficiently African, but there is an obligatory mothering that gets forced onto African women in this country that is nonsense. And that is romanticized. And I think that we're just like, but are you being respected? Well, no. So when I talk about parenting feminist boys, I'm talking about parenting, like deliberate parenting, not the obligatory, unchosen, forced parenting. I do think it's important to talk about it because also as part of so many conversations about patriarchy in this country, across sectors, very often, there's always that person who gets up and says, yeah, it's a problem in this country, but women raise these men who are problematic.
Yeah.
How are you all mothering? It's a crisis of mothering that we have so much patriarchal violence in this country. And I think, we treat that with that it deserves. But but I do think there's a question. So I actually welcome as you can see, it's like in my head it's very complicated, but like in the name of this panel. But I love complications, so I welcome the conversation.
Yeah.
That's a very long answer, but
but I think you've touched on everything, all the sparks about the things that we should be talking about. Especially, your last point, I think, around, it's interesting how people want to talk about gender-based violence, for instance, and normative ideas around gender. And then we don't talk about the patriarchal nonsense. We want to talk about how women buy into it, So there's a kind of... blaming that always lands on the shoulders of women. So I think that's quite an important point. Thanks, Pumla. Philippa, any thoughts?
What you all said, maybe? I've been thinking about this question ever since I was asked to be on the panel, and I think it's complex. It's complex because you don't... I'm a mother of two sons, a 29-year-old and a 15-year-old. So I was done, and then God threw me another one, and I caught him. and yes, I like that. and for me, it's understanding that. Even my own journey into feminism has been slow and changed over time. I still struggle because I have met women who call themselves feminists who have hit me over the head and made me feel like crap. And so, it's a complex world. All these isms, when we wear our badges and we come. And so I don't... all I know is that it is a journey when you raise your child, and you don't raise your child alone. You raise them into a context. And so the things that you do might be negated by the context within which they then grow into or exist in. And the other thing you learn so deeply as a parent is you do the best you can, but each child becomes who they become because that is who they become. And so you can influence, you can create an enabling environment, you can get down on your knees and pray. And then life happens, and who he is at 5 will be different to who he is at 15, maybe different to who he is at 30, and he might become a feminist at 60. I don't know. So for me, it's complicated. It's really, you know, you raise some of the complications, and for me, it's like, I don't know, but maybe the starting point, it's an important question because we are trying to create a world where we are more equal, where we honor each other, where we respect each other, where we see each other as complementary as opposed to fighting against each other. And so what are the conversations we need to have? What are the things we need to do to get there? Because it's not here yet. And where is it happening here? Can I recognize? I think we're so good at recognizing what isn't happening and where it isn't happening and what we are fighting against. And at this point in my life, I'm asking myself, where do I recognize these things that I want? Where am I seeing the world that I want to create? And can I enter into those spaces more? Can I amplify those spaces more? Because today I'm tired of fighting. I just want to be, you know. So it's all of that.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important.
Yeah. Where am I seeing the worlds I want to create? I love that. Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of the conversation, what you've all touched on, is just making me think like we have to ask this question about, and I know you've probably been asked this question so many times, and me too, and every time I give a different answer about, you know, like, what does feminism mean to you? It feels like a silly question to ask, but, you know, about for me it's about what Philippa, what you just said about the worlds we want to create. Recently, we were having a conversation in class, one of my classes, and then the more recent answer I had to the question of what does feminism mean to me was, well, that's my theory and practice of social justice more broadly. That's how I thought about it. But I'm thinking about this as kind of a reflection on this, because not just what it means ideologically, but what does it mean for how we navigate our world? Because that's what our children are, I mean, that's what they are part of, right? Like, what does it mean for how we are in the world? I don't know if you have any.
For me, the idea of what are we, how are we being, is a starting point, because I think many times when we think about the feminism or any ism, it's about fighting. It's about what are we hitting against. And when I'm in spaces with my sisters or the people who are comfortable with difference and with, there's a beingness, there's a centeredness, there is we can do this, we can change the worldness in the room. And I've been thinking about this, and I guess because I work with stories, as storyteller, and I work with traditional stories, and there's this whole narrative that we come from a very patriarchal society and so on. And I was listening to a Native American activist, I think her name is Pat McCabe or something like that, and she was talking about how in the time before, first of all, I was talking to another lady, and she was talking about how do we get back to the origin stories, which is the story, the beginning before the beginning before the beginning, which takes us back to a time where she says that in those stories are instructions of how we are to be as human beings. And it's where those kinds of philosophies like Ubuntu, which we kind of throw around as if it's confetti, but if you really listen and look at those things, kind of tell us how we are to be as people and as human beings. But then we live in the modern world, which requires us to be different. And then we take on certain behaviors and we make them ours. So for me, the thing is going back to, and sometimes going back and saying, but how really was it? And whose interpretation of how it was am I using? Because I think when you go back to the beginning of the beginning, we were made as, okay, I'm going to be very binary, male and female, masculine and feminine. We're living together, and the paradox of how those two hold together, not one being more important than the other, but each one bringing something into the world that was important for the other. And we've lost that. So for me, what is feminism? It's finding a way to be as human beings where we can create the world in the way that we want.
Yeah.
So I don't approach it from a very academic perspective. I approach it more from here and how I feel here. And then my head catches up at some point.
Thanks, Philippa.
So,
Pumla.
oh,
No, go ahead.
so my son is 16. My nephews are 23, I think. One of them is in the audience, and he's going to say, 24, you always do this. I think they're 23. I'm not sure. They may be 24. Their birthdays are right next to each other. And listen, to me, I'm old. Maybe they're 23, maybe they're 24. It's more or less the same thing. And so, I mean, I think, feminism is a word that appears a lot in our conversations and and I started calling myself, using the word feminist to describe myself when I was 15. And so I'm always very aware. I didn't become a feminist at 15. I found the word. And so I very consciously I just feel like it's really kind of my blood and my DNA, really. And my spirit and it's in my hair, it's in my nails, it's in my whatever, it's in my laughter, it's what I dance, whatever. It's just I don't know of me that isn't feminist in every, where feminism is like a thing that I put on and put off. So it's a very different relationship, not different, so that's the relationship. And so even the decision to parent, to be a parent, was a very conscious decision and sets of conversation with a person who was doing their own thinking and work around gender and feminism at the time. So it was a very kind of deliberate, and so I've thought very consistently about what it means to be a feminist mother, in its delights and its unpredictabilities. And I think that with parenting, and there are times when my son kind of shut down a restaurant because he's very loudly declared how he was feminist. Like he was having a conversation, but he got very excited with a not my friend, not his friend, my friend. So my friend had taken him out to dinner. I think it was their thing. They have their own special relationship. And so they had done their thing. And he apparently was like, Uncle so-and-so, I'm not going to put my friend on the spot. Uncle so-and-so, because we are feminists. And so apparently the whole restaurant just kind of turned around and looked at this toddler who had very loudly declared his and his uncle's feminism in the middle of like eating the fish at Ocean Basket. So yeah, something that so it's a word we use in our and it's so there's that dimension of it, that it's not it's part of how I speak about the world and do the world. I think that because my son when my nephews were also kind of 15 and 16, I kind of particularly obsessed about them, because I was thinking, so this is the age I found this word. I'm sure I know I was feminist before that, but I'm trying to kind of think about like what is a 15 year, I mean I grew up in the 80s, right? So I was 15 in the insane 80s. So it's a different time, right? But I mean, all times are political in different ways. And so I kind of, my poor nephews, and they kind of I watch them at 50. I'm like, okay, so what is the politics of the time? What does the feminism look like? What are they thinking about? What kind of, and how are they making those connections? But so in terms of what feminism means to me in relation to parenting, it is about it's in the things I've been able to allow to delight me. It's in the choices I've been able to make about what I think my child is entitled to. I take parenting very seriously. I was very well parented by both my parents, and I've had this sense since I was a child. I felt very well parented, and even as a parent, as I look back, I'm like, geez, these two weirdos were fantastic parents, like the things they did. So I was very well parented. So I'm like, think about parenting obsessively, like probably too much. But I mean, I am kind of
a thinker,
like obsessed about like a thing. So I'm parenting like one of my things, and I love it. I love doing it. I love being a parent. I'm very surprised. I'm very delighted by how much I've enjoyed it. But yeah, so it's in the joys, it's in the difficulties, in the decisions that I make, and it's the kind of conversations so it's in the everyday. It's also who I allow. I'm very careful about who I allow into my child's life, without being like a crazy mom who keeps him in a bubble and like allows him to choose his own people. But I mean, from my own life, right? But also, of course, not. So that's what feminine. So it's in everything. It's in how we touch each other. It's in how I negotiate being an Eastern Cape girl who was raised on loving rugby and not soccer, and having a son that I tried to keep away from rugby, and now watching myself become an unhinged rugby mom. And being like, I don't know how you can be so feminist and like unhinged girl, rugby mania from your socialization. So it's about how I make sense of those contradictions, and I'm able to show up for myself and for these three wonderful people who want to talk about masculinity, who want to also be just free people in the world, and how they. And what they're struggling with in romance, and in their bodies, and in the pressures, and in what they think about the world, and being a safe place for them to have those conversations, but also not being like, just having the enabling, hopefully, the knowledge that I'm always going to be here to whatever kind of conversation they want to have, even if it makes me uncomfortable. And many of those conversations are uncomfortable because. But also being delighted that I'm the person that people have conversations you're not supposed to have with your makazi or your dabs or your mom with about sex and girls and steroids and what if you offered drugs and what if you offered alcohol and so it's just it's trying to be a good person and trying to be a good person and trying to enable people to become good person and full beings, which is really what I wanted when I was 15. I just wanted to be able to think about who I wanted to be and what world I wanted to contribute to creating.
Yeah.
For me, I think, unlike you, Pumla, I was very young when I became accidentally pregnant. And for me to think through feminism as a mother, as a parent, at that stage, it really involved choice. And I'm very aware that, I used contraception, it failed, and then I had a conversation with myself of like, do I want this fetus, right? And I didn't romanticize it. I was like, you are 23 years old, do you really want this? And then there was a conversation with the father, who also, there was a negotiation, and we said, okay, we're going to do it. But I was very aware at that point, because of the feminist movement and women's movement in this country, that I was in a place where I could choose, and that was seriously on my list of choices, that I could actually abort this child, not a child, a fetus. And for me, that was really important to have that choice. And I know that that choice was very hard won. And it enabled me to make a choice that I wanted to be a mother at 24. Which I don't recommend, because your brain hasn't fully developed yet until you're 25.
Yes.
That's what I tell my son all the time. Like, your brain actually hasn't knit your frontal lobe, which is responsible for decision. Anyway, so with my undeveloped frontal lobe, I chose to have a child, and I was fortunate in that the co-parent, the father of the child, was also kind of a feminist, not quite, but had feminist leanings. And so we were able to, he really tried hard. And we negotiated this thing of labor. So for me, the key thing was labor. I'm not your mother, grown man. And I'm not going to be your mother. I'm the mother of this child. And so we were actually very good as parents. We still co-parent. We got married. Another thing you shouldn't do before 25. And then, and
Life lessons.
Yes, please listen to me. and
Be
and
feminist.
we got divorced, but I think something that we did get right, as we were very good parents. We both came from homes where there was violence, and we were both determined not to inflict violence on this child and to raise this child. We were both absolutely just in love with this child, and we were so good to each other, and we were good to the child because we really wanted to be a family in that particular way. And then also the other choices that I made, but I'm very aware that it wasn't forced upon me, and I think is a very different entry point into motherhood and parenthood, and especially motherhood, because it derails your whole life.
Yes.
Like, it does, and if you are not ready for it, it is so catastrophic. I thought I was ready, and I wasn't ready. And also for that reason, because I hadn't planned it, because I'm such an uber planner, my whole life is very structured and planned. I said, okay, now you're choosing it, and now you have to really up your game. And I'd read everything that I could lay my hands on, and I was determined I'm going to be the best mother, the best parent. And then, then various ways we raised the child. We did a lot of the labor in the house. I think it's so important. It's such an overlooked thing, is who is actually cooking the dinner, who's washing the dishes, who's changing the nappies, who's going out at night to the 24-hour pharmacy. That's such a middle-class thing, but like, we were really in it together in the trenches. I feel, very fortunate to have had that co-parent, and I still have him. And then I've had other co-parents. So I've lived, after that marriage, lived with a woman, and I've had a queer relationship or a same-sex relation, whatever you want to call it. And that person also co-parented my son. And I've always seen feminist mothering as collective mothering, because there's been so many people, like my mother, my grandmother, my sister, they're all women, my partner, who was a woman, And they, there was this collective energy that was put into this child, and I think that was part of a world that we co-constructed as a feminist space. For me, that is always that. And then, we lived in Washington, D.C., we went to protests a lot, and my child was raised with an awareness of issues of race, gender, and how the world is, how the power cleaves the world in half, and what it means to be on the receiving end and not on the receiving end. And reading. So when he was 16, we started reading bell hooks together because he loves to read. And the first text I made him, I couldn't make him do anything really, but was, bell hooks, feminism is for everyone. And he liked to read. And so I said, read this chapter. You're unhappy with school, you're bored, you think you're too clever for school. Read this. This is what my university students are reading. Maybe, are you on that level yet? If you're bored at school, I tricked him a little bit. And he loved, and he's now reading, he's talking about getting married now. And he's reading bell hooks is all about love. Because I said, if you're thinking about this, and just in life, if you're in relation with other people, and especially with women, you've got to read all about love. And so he's now, so we've had this ongoing multiple conversations through actions, through words, and through reading. It's been he's read feminist theory. He's read Assata Shakur, who I also said this is Tupac Shakur's auntie. That's, so there's a lovely kind of unfolding of activist and intellectual project in our home, or in our former. He doesn't live with me anymore, so yeah. I'm pleased about that.
It's I'm just reflecting on what you all have said is just this happy kind of reality of just being, right? It's about who you are as a feminist mom, and what that means for raising a child in terms of the spaces you create in your home, your communities. Sometimes, because for me, it's been that experience of a lot of my life is also planned, and the pregnancy was also planned, except I didn't plan to have 2 in one go. So that just threw everything, threw all the planning out the window. So for me, it felt like, on top of just trying to raise twins, I couldn't still think about, raising feminist twins, I mean, with a partner, of course, it was also very just there. We had to both just do what needed to be done, whether it was going to the pharmacy or, waking up at 3 a.m. So some of it feels like, I don't know, it feels a little bit like conversations we need to have, books we need to read, things we need to do. But that's also very much a part of who you are as a person. So I'm just thinking about the literature talks about teaching consent early, encouraging emotional expression, shopping across the aisle. Shopping is a big thing, walking into clothing stores and
going
across,
shopping.
literal shopping across the aisle. Being particular about toys. Okay, there's a horror story from when we were still spending a lot of time in toy shops. And we walked into Toy Kingdom, the big one of the big toy stores, and going down the aisle to pay for something, I saw a magnifying glass as a toy, but the image was of a boy holding up the magnifying glass, looking under, as if looking under a dress, kind of, in a toy store. So just, that was really, anyway, I did what needed to be done as far as that went. But being vigilant, right, about the kinds of things that they expose to, promoting diverse role models, modeling respectful behavior, challenging stereotypes, encouraging critical thinking, supporting their interest, diverse interest, not gendered, keeping, having uncomfortable conversations. As you were talking, my cousin last night said to me, her 14-year-old son said to her, Mom, you know, at some point I'm going to have sex. And she was, she wanted to, she was so happy. She was struggling with that happiness that he could have this conversation with her, but just the horror, you know. She felt like, oh shit, he's 14, you know. So yes, all the stuff that they tell us to do, and so I'm just wondering, like, before we open up for conversation, for questions and conversation about, you know, like the stuff, but then the actual doing. Barbara.
I just remember, sorry to jump in here,
No,
but
no,
we
no.
had, when my son was 16, I got these condoms. So I was like, look, I got condoms, and I put the condoms, we had in the hallway, and there was this jar, and I put the condoms there, and he came home from school, and he's like, my God, Mom, like, everybody's going to come in here and just see condoms. Like, can we just put it in the bathroom cabinet, please? But I just wanted to have, like, I was just, you know, like, if you need condoms, here are the, you know,
Yes.
please. I mean, you know, for 2 years, it was just almost not every day, but I was like, you know what? You have to use condoms if you're going to have sex. And he's like, it's like a candy store in here with condoms, like, laying in a condom store, candy store. And he's like, can we just put it in the bathroom? Like, I know it's in the bathroom. I will use it if I need it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of went a bit like over
Yes.
the top.
Yeah.
I was just pleased, you know.
Yeah.
But those were some of, I mean, he initiated, like your niece or nephew, you know, most of the awkward stuff. And he's like, can you dial it back a bit?
Yeah. Well, she also mentioned a condom story. She said she bought condoms, and she said, you know, like, if at some point you're going to need it, and so she left it somewhere in the house, and she said every day she went to check how many condoms were left over. So yeah, it's about that discomfort that we have as well in trying to.
It's a weird thing. I mean, it's an interesting thing for me because I think my younger son is a lot more open about certain conversations, uncomfortable conversations, like when he had his first erection. Like, you know, then should I talk to him? I said, go talk to your dad. But also having those conversations, and also, for me, wanting to. I think I've grown up, my partner's a little bit more traditional than me, but he knows I'm a little bit weird and different and opinionated, and so he allows me to be me, but I think many of the things I do kind of is like, you know, if he had his choice, he probably wouldn't do, or, you know, so we have this back and forth, and so I want to almost problematize that it's not always easy because your partner might not see the things. So there's a process of negotiating with him about, I remember when my second son was born, I had little pink things. I wanted to say, raising a child, I think we need to stop this thing of gender reveal and knowing the baby before the baby, because already you're putting your child in a box. Before they're even born. And for all my children, I didn't want to know whether they were male or female. I just wanted to have a child, a healthy child. That was my prayer. That's what I wanted. But now when Sente was born, I had some pink things because, you know, people will give you pink things and we wear all the colors and I had some of these little jumpsuits that were really in good condition. And now the question is, do I now go and buy blue things because now I have a blue babe, a boy? But I have these things that are still okay, you know. So my son, unfortunately, in the first few years of his life, probably wore a lot more pink, you know, than other baby boys. But I was just like, these clothes are in good condition. Can we use them? and for me, it's that constant negotiation also with my partner of saying, can we have this conversation? And sometimes he just looks at me and walks away. My daughter's also quite feminist, and so we might have these debates with the boys. And my younger son now is interested in theater and is acting. And I'm really happy about that, because I know with literature and with theater, he gets exposed to things and he has to critique things and he has to explore things that he might not really have to talk about in his normal day-to-day world. So it's that thing of, where am I having those conversations? Am I comfortable? And sometimes just telling him, this is a weird conversation. I'm not comfortable having it, but come on, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go together and let's find our way through it, you know. And yeah, so that thing of just really understanding, it's not always easy. You are constantly negotiating with yourself, having conversations with the child, having conversations with your partner or your in-laws or your siblings. I have a family who are very, very Christian, and one of my cousins and his wife always get the young people together, and then they say, aha, when are you getting married? We're waiting for you to get married. I mean, at this age, you know, you should be getting married, and you girls, when are you having babies? And, you know, and then my daughter and my nieces sometimes say things like, we're not having children, or things that perturb them, and then you get these perturbed phone calls. But my thing is having those conversations, and sometimes sitting in that discomfort in the inner family or in the broader family of saying, I allow these, or I have these conversations, and it's okay, and it's not easy. I just want you to know it's not easy, and sometimes my boys are not readers. My daughter is a reader. So reading with them might not be the thing to do, but maybe it's watching a movie, or maybe even it's just watching a Disney movie and seeing what they say and then having a conversation about, but what do you think about that? Could we have done it differently? Or listening to the music.
Yeah.
Sometimes, learning to listen to their music.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm that mother who's always saying, what did they say? so it's that thing also that Pumla says, that constant conversation with yourself of where are my own boundaries and how far am I open? Because you may or may not be, or you may be quite open to things and the context you're in isn't. And how do you negotiate those spaces? And then how do you help the children negotiate those spaces? We went to a wedding in Uganda in December, and my youngest, he had dreadlocks. He chose some pants and a T-shirt and whatever. The other friends' kids were all wearing suits, you know, and proper shoes. But my child came looking like a hip-hop artist and had a hat on, you know. And at first I was kind of like, we haven't been home for a long time. I must get this child to dress properly like the other kids will be dressed. And then I realized, actually, no, this is who he is. This is who he is in Cape Town. This is who he's been for the last 15 years of his life. Let him be. And actually, he was fine, and everybody took him for who he was. So it's that thing of, am I slipping back into what society is asking of me, or am I just saying, no, this is who we are, and it's okay. It's complicated, and it's hard.
It is.
Oh, such amazing answers. So for me, I mean, the list, Flo, honestly, Flo up. Sorry.
Careful now.
She doesn't like being called Flo. I made a mistake. Floa. I call her Floa. Anyway. The list is easy for me. The list has actually been, because when I was a child, I felt race, and I felt very, very gendered. I thought about, and it's partly my parents' fault and partly the gift that they gave me, because I was very angry about how much being a girl was used against me outside of. So it was very startling, because at home my parents were very weird. They were like,
Do you?
we talked too much, we did too much. They were just like, you're so marvelous, the three of you. The girls and the brother came, like, we did weird things that like nobody said, but girls do, boys. And of course they were like the larger family, but the parents seemed to think like they had these magical children who were like Einstein and like the equivalent of Simone Biles, and they all pretended. They were fantastic liars to their kids, because we all thought we were like brilliant and graceful and we were fantastic singers and fantastic everything, right? But there was structure. We weren't completely indulged, but we felt, And then I would go outside, and it was like, girls don't climb trees. You speak too soft, and you speak too loud, and you're too knock-kneed. You shouldn't be doing this, and you shouldn't do that, and you're too fat, and you were too this, and you were too that, and you're not like your sisters who were like graceful swans, and you like Humpty. It was like there was a lot of stuff on the outside. I felt very, very gendered outside. I also grew up on at a particularly political place. So the race stuff everybody felt, and so as a child I felt very much like I had to, I felt enormous joy, but I also felt enormous anger. I feel like a lot of the time I kept spending time going, a big part of my internal dialogue was like, I can still do whatever I want just because I'm a girl. You're not going to stop me because I'm a girl. Because there was a lot of things because you're a girl outside. In the schooling system, in the people that, and so on. And so the conflict was very clear. The adults was almost split down the middle. Like there were the ones who were like, okay, don't know, she's a bit weird, and did whatever parents and older people were supposed to do. But there was also a very regimented sense of like, you are now in school. Girls will stay on and sweep the class after school. And I was like, why? Girls will do needlework and boys will do gardening, except nobody did gardening. Boys just played. And then you sat with this, so it was very, very regimented. And so when I imagined, because you only have your own childhood, so I just thought this is what childhood was. And I was like, and my friends, my girlfriends, and I would just be like very annoyed about this all the time. No, we're not going. We're bunking. We're getting into trouble. And we're clever girls, so we could get away with a lot more than if we weren't performing as well at school. So there was a little bit of allowance. So why am I saying all of this? So for me, I think about, so I suppose when I became a parent, I just assumed that children are bombarded by, I didn't think, people are nice to kids and they let kids be. So I assumed that kids are bombarded by this thing, and I needed to be awake to it, right? So I was, like when we had my son, and I'm going to have to be careful now because I'm also under strict instructions not to reveal. He's like, don't talk about me so much. Don't tell people my business. Don't tell people my business. I don't know what the business is, but I know the business. Obviously, the things I'm not going to tell you, anybody. But when we were, Kagiso, the South African Canadian novelist and friend, Kagiso Lesigo Molupe, our children are a year apart. And I remember at some point, so I'm not raising my child with the other parent. So I remember that one of the times when they were in the country, Kagiso and her son, and her son and my son were in the back seat of the car, and we had just gossiped about how they both liked superheroes and pink sparkly handbags. And so, my son would wear like his Spider-Man. I don't know, there was something about a pink sparkly handbag that they both liked. And her son was Batman and my son was Spider-Man, but they were Spider-Man with like a pink sparkly handbag. And we both, I think this is the most delightful thing. Superheroes got to know where to put their things too, right? I don't know what things. Because being a superhero means you don't need things. But anyway, clearly they were kind of saying, you think you're such clever feminist moms. Superheroes need a handbag. So I love this image, and she actually wrote an essay about it at the time. And I remember, so this is around that time when they're going through the Batman and Spider-Man and not wanting to wash, but wanting a handbag, and only wanting to wear this all the time in public and in private. And so they were at the back seat, and I was, my partner at the time did the school run with me this one time. And so I had the two of them, and then another, I'm not going to reveal who, because you know the people and they live in Cape Town, but another couple who was a friend. They were friends and neighbors of mine. So we had these three kids, these little toddlers, not toddlers, maybe they were like 5. One of them was 4, the other 2 were 5 or something like that. At the back, they're going through this phase. And I, in the front, so I'm driving, and my then partner is in the front passenger seat. And afterwards, he says to me, I just don't understand. Is it normal for, because they had this argument about the dog. Like, I thought the dog was a girl, but now I think the dog is a boy. But why? How do you know the dog is a boy? Because the dog has a penis. But why does the dog? And then the friend, the third friend, who's I'm not going to identify, only because I haven't asked for their permission to share this story.
We need time for questions. Sorry to cut you.
Says, well, just because he has a penis doesn't mean he can't still be a girl. So my friend then says, my partner then says that afterwards, is it normal for children to be having conversations about? And I was like, well, yes, right? Yes. And for me, that's the crux of it, right? So for me, the stuff about colors was easy. Like we didn't allow pink or blue. So then there were other problems, of course, in terms of backlash with that. And the toys, like, I was very kind of dictatorial about the kinds of toys he was allowed to be given as gifts. But yeah, so I mean, I don't, yeah, maybe my own experience of childhood has meant that, like, some of those things were the things on the list, were things that had to be on the list, because I was so aware of them as a child.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Pumla. We have 3 minutes for questions. There's a question over here, very enthusiastic hand in the front.
Thank you so much. This was so insightful. One thing I want to maybe just put out there is a bit the elephant in the room, that we're talking about raising feminist boys or feminist children, and it is a panel of mothers, right? There's no father here, and I do think that there, is, even if you choose to raise, be a single parent by choice, there's others that don't, and there is also, I think, fathers and an increasing number of dads who are actually interested in raising their kids as feminists, right? Yeah. And I think those perspectives, Frankie, if you're listening, would also be very valuable. And my question pertains to this kind of ecosystem, this broader ecosystem. And I think, Barbara, you touched on that beautifully, and how we get the ecosystem to, I guess, also, raise our boys in a way that they can, they also sometimes be reined in, because I have 1 boy, 2 girls, and I'm very, very aware how I sometimes need to encourage my girls to be more and to do more, and my boy to almost tone it down a bit, because he's always encouraged by society to be better, to be bigger, to be louder, and my girls are just not that. And I can see, though, that no matter how much I do this, there is still this bigger ecosystem, this bigger societal pressures that push against that. And I mean, sometimes I'm thinking that maybe my 2 daughters will actually grow up to make my son more feminist. I'm an only child. I don't understand sibling dynamics, so I find it super fascinating. And I'm just hoping, right, that my girls will also do their part in keeping their brother in check and telling him, look, this is what a feminist looks like. So, I was just wondering if you could reflect a little bit on this ecosystem and how you play with that.
Sure. Barbara?
Oh, the ecosystem. Ecosystem. I mean, the ecosystem is the family, institution, society, right? It's where we maybe do our best in the bubble, and what I've described as a nuclear family. I don't have the reference point of raising girls. I have a niece who I notice who's now 14, who's very, very different to the way, you know, my son had such a confidence always, which he lost, you know, and then regained again only recently. But, you know, there's a lot of, you know, I'm sorry if I'm going to offend anyone, I kept my child out of church because I thought so much of church was very toxic for me growing up, and you know, so I try to mediate and have these conversations also about society and where, you know, what is happening outside the home, bringing it home and being able to talk about, but that wasn't right and that wasn't fair. And when you did that to that little girl, you know, how do you think she felt? And it's so much of being an ethical human being and an empathetic human being, and to recognize your privilege. So the conversations about male privilege and white privilege in our house started at age in the uterus.
Yeah. And as you were saying, it's like being explicit about curating that ecosystem, what it is, like your decisions about what's included or not. Okay. It looks like, unfortunately, sorry, we've run out of time, so we don't have any other time for questions, but we're happy for you to engage us afterwards. I want to say thank you to all the guests, panelists, for the really enlivening conversation, knowing that we could have probably gone on for another hour. And thank you to all of you for attending.
Thank you.